I caught my husband cheating with my sister in Hawaii. I staged my revenge and left them ruined. Winter in Boston has a way of stealing the light from the sky long before the day is truly done. I've always found it beautiful in a melancholy sort of way. I remember that particular evening, staring out of my office window on the 45th floor, watching the first snowflakes of the season begin their silent, lazy dance to the street. The city below was a glittering tapestry of lights, a brilliant man-made constellation against the deep, bruised purple of the encroaching night. My name is Audrey, and back then I was Audrey Williams. On paper, my life was the kind of success story people write articles about. I'd clawed my way up the ladder on Wall Street to become a respected investment analyst, one of the few women in my division with a corner office. I had the view, the sharp-tailored pantsuits that felt like armor, and a reputation for being calm and decisive under pressure. The gentle click of my office door opening pulled me from my thoughts. It was my secretary, Patty, a sweet young woman with bright eyes and an even brighter future. She was holding a steaming mug. "Ms. Williams, it's almost 8. I was making myself some tea and thought you might like one." I turned from the window, a grateful, tired smile touching my lips. "Patty, you're a lifesaver. Thank you." I took the mug, the warmth seeping into my cold hands. "You should be heading home. Don't stay late on my account." "I'm just finishing up a few things," she said, her voice laced with the gentle concern she always showed me. "But you look exhausted." "Long day. The quarterly reports are always a beast," I admitted, taking a sip of the chamomile tea. "But we're almost there." "Well, don't forget you have a home to go to," she said with a knowing smile before quietly slipping out and closing the door behind her. Her words hung in the air, a home to go to. She was right. I closed my laptop, the finality of the click echoing in the grand, silent office. As I packed my leather briefcase, the weight of the documents and the expensive laptop felt heavier than usual. I was passionate about my work. I truly was. There's a unique thrill in untangling complex market data, in predicting the subtle shifts of the economy, a feeling of control and competence that I thrived on. But lately, the thrill had been fading. The long hours, the immense pressure, it was a grind. What I truly cherished, what my heart genuinely yearned for at the end of a day like this was my home, my warm, cozy home, and the man waiting for me there, Gregory, my husband. The drive home was my transition, my decompression chamber. I'd navigate the dense city traffic, the radio playing some soft jazz station, and watch as the towering steel and glass skyscrapers gave way to the tree-lined streets and familiar houses of the suburbs. Each mile brought a little more peace, shedding a layer of the high-stakes analyst and revealing the woman underneath, the woman who just wanted to be home. I remember thinking, as I turned onto our street, that there was a warm dinner waiting for me. Gregory was a wonderful cook, and he always made something special on the days I worked late. A little knot of warmth bloomed in my chest at the thought, chasing away the winter chill. That was my life, you see, a high-stakes career by day and a simple, loving home life by night. It was, I thought with a deep sense of satisfaction, the perfect balance. I had everything a woman could possibly want, or so I had foolishly, blindly believed. The moment I pushed open our heavy oak front door, the scent wrapped around me like a warm hug, beef stew, rich with wine and herbs. It was my absolute favorite comfort food, the meal I craved after a brutal week. The soft glow of the lamps cast a golden light on the hardwood floors, and the house was quiet except for the gentle clatter of pots from the kitchen. "I'm home, Gregory," I called out, my voice shedding the professional crispness of the office and softening into the easy comfort of a wife. My briefcase dropped to the floor with a heavy thud, and I kicked off my heels. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, a clean white apron tied over his work shirt, a wooden spoon in one hand. A smudge of flour was dusted on his cheek, and his smile, that slow, wonderful smile, reached his eyes. "Welcome home, Audrey," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He walked over, wiped his hands on his apron, and wrapped his arms around me. He smelled of spices and home. "You worked late again. You must be exhausted." "A little," I admitted, leaning my head against his shoulder, melting into his embrace. The tension in my neck and back began to dissolve instantly. But I feel better now that I'm home. Our house was our sanctuary. It wasn't a sprawling mansion like the ones some of my colleagues owned, filled with art they didn't understand and rooms they never entered. It was a proper home, a beautiful colonial in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood that we had picked out together. I'll never forget the day we found it. Gregory had walked through the rooms, his eyes wide with a sort of hopeless admiration. He'd looked at the price tag and then at me, a sad smile on his face. Audrey, it's perfect, but it's out of my league. His salary as a loan officer at a local bank was steady, but modest. He could never have afforded the mortgage on a place like this. I had looked at his dear, honest face, and, without a second thought, I said, then it's a good thing it's in my league. I took care of the down payment and the lion's share of the monthly payments from my salary and bonuses. When he protested, saying he felt inadequate, I'd simply squeezed his hand. It's our home, Gregory. Your name is on the deed right next to mine. That's all that matters. And I'd meant it with every fiber of my being. I would have given him the world. We ate dinner at our small kitchen table, the one we'd found at a flea market and refinished ourselves one sunny weekend. Between bites of the delicious stew, I listened as he told me about his day. He had this wonderful way of spinning stories about the little things. That day, he told me about a young couple, first-time homebuyers, who were so nervous their hands were shaking as they signed the mortgage papers. You should have seen their faces, Audrey, he said, his own face animated with the memory. When it was all done, the woman started crying and the husband just hugged her. They were so happy. It's moments like that. It makes the paperwork worth it. I loved these simple, everyday conversations. They were the anchor in my often turbulent world of volatile stocks and demanding clients. He made my life feel normal, real, grounded. He made me feel safe. He was my rock, my quiet harbor in a raging sea. After dinner, we curled up on the sofa together, a single Afghan spread over our laps, and watched some silly sitcom. His arm was around me, my head rested on his shoulder. I felt a profound sense of peace. This, I thought, was what true wealth looked like. As he was refilling my wine glass later that evening, Gregory mentioned, almost as an afterthought, by the way, Heather called today. Just the mention of her name was enough to make the cozy warmth in the room drop by a few degrees. A familiar tightness gripped my chest. Heather was my younger sister, and our relationship was a tangled mess of love, resentment, and obligation. She was beautiful, stunningly so, the kind of woman who seemed to glide through life on a cloud of charm and effortless grace. But beneath the surface, she was adrift. She drifted from one part-time job to another, from one failed artistic pursuit to the next, all while remaining completely financially dependent on our parents, Walter and Joyce. And since my parents' retirement fund was propped up by my contributions, that meant Heather was, by extension, living on my dime. My parents had always enabled her. It had been that way since we were children. I remembered one Christmas vividly. I was 12 and had been begging for a proper chemistry set. I was fascinated by science, by how things worked. Heather, who was 10, wanted a ridiculously expensive porcelain doll from a fancy catalog. On Christmas morning, she got the doll. I got a sensible sweater and a book about women in science. A chemistry set is too dangerous, Audrey, my father had said. And besides, this book is much more educational. Heather was the beautiful, delicate one to be cuddled and spoiled. I was the smart, responsible one who was expected to understand. What did she want? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. I swirled the deep red wine in my glass, watching the way it clung to the sides. It's about that Hawaii trip your parents are planning, he said, settling back onto the sofa. They want all of us to go, the whole family, next month. I stopped swirling. I slowly placed the glass on the coffee table. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Of course it was. They wouldn't call me, the person with the demanding career and the checkbook, to ask if it was a good time. They'd go through Heather, the emotional center of their universe. They'd go through Gregory, my kind-hearted husband, who always wanted to see the best in them. Walter and Joyce seemed to really want a vacation with the whole family, Gregory said gently. He had that earnest, reasonable tone in his voice, the one I found so hard to argue with. But a bitter smile I couldn't contain touched my lips. A vacation with the whole family, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. Let me guess. Heather has been feeling emotionally unstable again and needs a break. Gregory had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. She has been having a tough time, Audrey. Her entire adult life has been a tough time, Gregory, because she's never had to face a single real consequence. I sighed, the fight going out of me. It was an old argument, an old wound. My parents adored Heather. With me, they were strict, almost demanding. My academic scholarships, my Ivy League degree, my soaring career, they took it all for granted. They never once expressed real gratitude for the years I'd been quietly paying their property taxes, for the wire transfers to cover their mounting medical expenses after my father's heart surgery. I was the reliable daughter, the walking 401. Heather was the special fragile one. I see, I said, my voice flat. And who exactly is paying for this tropical getaway? Gregory shifted his gaze, looking down at his hands. Well, they didn't explicitly say, but the implication was that I would. I finished for him. I let out a long, slow breath. I knew the script by heart. For the next few days, I held my ground. Gregory, I'm in the middle of a huge portfolio review, I said over breakfast. The timing is terrible. The next day, I tried. I only have so much vacation time, and I was hoping we could take a trip, just the two of us, later in the year. But he was persistent in his gentle, relentless way. He didn't argue or raise his voice. He just chipped away at my defenses. One evening, he came up behind me while I was standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through work emails on my phone. He started rubbing my shoulders, his strong fingers kneading the knots of tension there. Honey, think about it, he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. Pristine beaches, Mai Tais at sunset. A real break. You deserve this. You work so hard for everyone. He framed it as a gift to me, a reward for my diligence. It was a clever tactic. It won't be a break, Gregory, I countered, not looking up from my screen. It will be a week of listening to my mother praise Heather for breathing while my father asks me for stock tips and then ignores my advice. We'll make our own fun, he promised, his hands never ceasing their soothing motion. I swear, just you and me. We can go snorkeling, find a secluded beach. It will be like a second honeymoon. He was good. He was very, very good. He knew exactly what to say, painting a picture I wanted so desperately to be real, a picture where my family was functional, where a vacation was actually relaxing. The final push came from my mother. She called me at the office, her voice a syrupy blend of sweetness and guilt. Audrey, dear, Heather is so looking forward to this trip. Her spirits have been so low, and she thinks some time with her big sister would do her a world of good. It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple, and she was a master of it. That night, defeated, I told Gregory that I would do it. I sat at my desk and pulled up the resort's website. The prices were astronomical. I booked the oceanfront suite for us and 2 deluxe rooms for my parents and Heather. As I entered my credit card information, a wave of resentment washed over me so strong it was almost dizzying. It was during that week of planning that I started noticing things, small things. I overheard Gregory on the phone in the other room, and I heard him laugh and say, "Don't worry, Heather, I'll handle Audrey. She'll come around." At the time, I thought he was just being a good mediator. Another evening, I saw a text flash on his phone screen from her. I only caught a glimpse, something about the plan. When I asked, he said Heather was just asking for help planning a surprise for my parents for their anniversary, which was still 6 months away. It seemed plausible enough. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of work and my family issues were making me see shadows where there were none. He was a good husband, a good brother-in-law. He was trying to mend the fences I had long given up on. A trip to Hawaii, I finally said to him, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. All right, let's do it. Gregory's face lit up with a brilliant, relieved smile. I knew you'd come around. This is going to be great, Audrey, I promise. He stood up happily and headed toward the kitchen to get us some celebratory wine, and I sat there, trying to ignore the small, cold knot of dread in the pit of my stomach, a silent alarm that I had chosen to ignore. The flight to Maui was exactly as I had predicted. I had used my air miles to upgrade all of us to first class, a fact my mother mentioned loudly to the flight attendant. My daughter Audrey is so successful, she'd said, beaming. She takes such good care of us. It was meant to sound like a compliment, but it felt like she was announcing the terms of our transaction. Heather spent the entire 6-hour flight complaining that the seat didn't recline far enough and that the movie selection was terrible. Gregory, bless his heart, played the patient buffer, fetching her extra pillows and laughing at her jokes. The resort I'd booked was breathtaking, a slice of tropical luxury nestled on Wailea Beach. Palm trees swayed in a gentle breeze, and the air smelled of salt and flowers. As we approached the grand open-air lobby, the receptionist greeted us with a cheerful aloha. "Reservation for the Montgomery Williams party," I said, managing a tired smile. "Welcome," the woman beamed. We have the Ocean View Alley suite for you and 2 adjoining Ocean View deluxe rooms. It's a beautiful setup. As I handed over my credit card for the incidentals, I caught a glimpse of my mother, Joyce, her eyes wide as she took in the marble floors and soaring ceilings. She was smiling with a deep, smug satisfaction. It was a look I knew well, the look of someone enjoying a luxury they felt they were owed. Still, I was determined to make this work. I plastered a smile on my face, telling myself that time together as a family was precious, even if I was the one funding the entire production. "Gregory, could you help the bellman with the luggage?" I called out to my husband. He was standing a little way off by a large fountain, deep in a hushed conversation with Heather. They were leaning in close, their heads almost touching, the murmur of their voices lost in the sound of the cascading water. When they saw me approaching, they abruptly straightened up and stopped talking. A sudden, awkward silence fell between them. "What were you two whispering about?" I asked, keeping my tone light and breezy, though my internal alarms were starting to ring. "Oh, just activities," Gregory answered, looking a bit flustered. He ran a hand through his hair. "Heather was saying she's interested in snorkeling, and I was telling her about a good spot I read about." Heather nodded quickly, a little too quickly. "Yes, the underwater world. Isn't it just wonderful?" Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I sensed a strange energy between them, a shared secret that hung in the air, but I just nodded, pushing the feeling down. "Yes, it's wonderful." After we'd all settled into our magnificent, expensive rooms, we met for a late lunch at the hotel's beachside restaurant. From our seats on the terrace, the view of the brilliant blue ocean was stunning. "This is just lovely," my mother exclaimed, after her first sip of a ridiculously overpriced cocktail. "Audrey, thank you so much for making this trip possible." I was so taken aback by this rare expression of gratitude that I was momentarily speechless. "You're welcome, Mom." "Heather really needed this break," my father, Walter, explained, as if justifying the expense. "She's been so emotionally unstable lately. This Hawaii trip should cheer her up." "That's right," Joyce agreed, patting Heather's hand. "Heather is a special child. She has an artistic soul. She feels things more deeply than most people. She needs special care." I couldn't help but frown into my water glass. They always called her special, treating her with this excessive, suffocating protection as if she were a delicate porcelain doll. Meanwhile, my struggles, my successes, they were just expected. I was the sturdy workhorse. She was the fragile unicorn. "You agree, don't you, Gregory?" Walter asked, turning to my husband for validation. "Of course," Gregory answered immediately, without a moment's hesitation. He looked at Heather with an expression of profound sympathy. Heather needs time to relax and find herself. I felt a slight chill despite the warm Hawaiian sun. Since when had Gregory become my sister's primary defender? Since when did he care so deeply about her finding herself? They hadn't been particularly close before this. Something felt off, terribly off. The perfectly painted paradise was beginning to look like a very convincing forgery. The next morning, we were all supposed to spend the day at the beach. We'd planned to rent a cabana, order lunch, maybe even try paddleboarding. We were at the sprawling breakfast buffet, piling our plates with pineapple, papaya, and pastries, when Gregory, who had been quiet all morning, suddenly stood up from the table. "I'm sorry, everyone," he said, folding his napkin and placing it on the table. He looked slightly uneasy, his eyes darting around. "I just got an urgent call from the bank." I looked up at him, my fork halfway to my mouth, a piece of mango suspended in the air. "A call from the bank? It's 7 a.m. in Boston, and you're in Hawaii." The excuse sounded flimsy, illogical. "Aren't you on vacation?" "Well, yes, but it's an important client issue," he said, and I noticed he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at a point just over my shoulder, a problem with a major business loan. "It's complicated, but I need to get on a few conference calls and handle it. It might take a few hours." He leaned down and gave my shoulder a quick, stiff squeeze. "I'll be back as soon as I can. You guys go on ahead to the beach." He walked away before I could ask another question, his pace brisk. After he left, a heavy silence fell over the table. I finally broke it, turning to my parents. "Isn't that strange? Gregory's job isn't like mine. He doesn't have international clients. I can't imagine an emergency that would require his immediate attention during a planned vacation." "Oh, Audrey, you're too suspicious," my mother sighed, dabbing her lips with a napkin in that delicate way she had, always expecting the worst. That's your problem. You analyze everything to death. Your mother's right, Heather chimed in, her voice dripping with faux syrupy concern. Gregory is just a responsible man. He's dedicated to his job. You should be proud of him instead of cross-examining him. Her defense was immediate and fierce, which was in itself suspicious. I fell silent, nodding numbly, but a seed of real, potent anxiety was taking root inside me. Their united front, their quick dismissal of my valid concerns, it felt rehearsed. I excused myself from the table, saying I'd forgotten my sunscreen in the room. Once I was back in the cool silence of our suite, I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I took out my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy as I looked up the main number for Gregory's company, First National Bank. It took me a moment to find it. I took a deep breath to steady my voice and dialed. A cheerful automated voice answered, and I navigated the menu until I reached a human receptionist. Good morning, First National. This is Brenda speaking. How may I help you? Hello, Brenda, I said, trying to keep my voice casual and light. This is Audrey Williams, Gregory Williams's wife. I have a quick question. I know he's on vacation, but he mentioned an urgent client issue with a major loan, and I just wanted to see if there was a message I could pass along for him. Mr. Williams? Brenda paused, and I could hear the faint rhythmic clicking of a keyboard. Let me see here. According to our records, ma'am, Mr. Williams is on a pre-approved vacation this week. I'm not seeing any flags or urgent client matters assigned to him. His out-of-office message directs everything to his supervisor. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. So there are no emergencies? No, ma'am. Not that I'm aware of. Everything looks quiet on his end. Can I help you with anything else? No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's all, thank you. I hung up the phone. I stood there in the middle of the luxurious hotel room, the phone feeling like a cold, heavy stone in my hand. He had lied. It wasn't a suspicion anymore, it was a fact. Gregory had looked me in the eye and told me a bold, deliberate lie. The question wasn't just why. It was where was he, and what, or who, was he doing that required such an elaborate deception? By lunchtime, Gregory still hadn't returned. I sat on the terrace with my family, trying to pretend everything was normal, that I wasn't being eaten alive from the inside out. I picked at a ridiculously expensive Cobb salad, the vibrant colors mocking the gray storm brewing inside me. My parents and Heather were chatting happily, laughing about some memory from a past vacation, as if Gregory's prolonged absence didn't concern them in the slightest. Their nonchalance was a bright, flashing warning sign. It wasn't normal. A loving family would be concerned. A loving family would be asking questions. Theirs was an act, and they were terrible actors. Suddenly, a cheerful notification chime came from Heather's beach bag, which was slung over the back of her chair. Heather, that's your phone, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She jumped, as if startled, then hurriedly reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. For a split second, as she angled the screen to read the message, my eyes, trained to scan data in milliseconds, caught the preview on the lock screen. All set for today. Can't wait. The sender's name was just one letter, G. My blood ran cold. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head. Heather quickly clutched the phone to her chest, her cheeks flushing a deep, guilty red. It's nothing, she said defensively, her eyes flicking nervously toward me. Just some travel consultation. I held her gaze, keeping my expression a perfect mask of calm curiosity. From whom? Just a tour guide, she stammered, that blush deepening on her cheeks. He's looking into some options for us for an excursion. I nodded slowly, quietly. I didn't push. I didn't call her out. I didn't want to show my hand. But inside me, a hurricane was beginning to rage. G was almost certainly Gregory. And what preparations were they referring to? What options? It was all there, the whispers, the lies, the secret texts. They weren't just cracks in the facade anymore. The entire foundation of my life, my marriage, my family, was crumbling into dust right before my eyes. I took a slow sip of my iced tea, the cold glass a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. Then I looked at my mother, then my father, then my sister. Their faces were studies in feigned innocence, and in that moment, I knew with bone-deep certainty they were all in on it. Whatever it was, they knew. They were his accomplices. I leaned back in my chair, the picture of calm. My analyst brain, the part of me that stayed cool under pressure, was taking over. Emotion was a liability. I needed data. I needed proof. You know, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, a stark contrast to the cheerful chatter around us. If Gregory says he's going out alone again tomorrow, I'm going to follow him. My mother, Joyce, gasped dramatically, placing a hand on her chest. Audrey, what a terrible thing to say. Following your own husband? That's insane. A marriage is built on trust. Your mother is right, Audrey, Heather said, her voice smooth and persuasive as a serpent. You're just being paranoid. You're letting your high-stress job get to you. You need to relax. But it wasn't paranoia. It was intuition, a gut feeling so strong it was a physical certainty. Something was fundamentally, deeply wrong, and I was going to find out what it was. If there's nothing to hide, I said, my eyes locking onto Heather's, a silent challenge passing between us, then there's no problem, is there? She looked away first. The morning sun cast a brilliant, almost tauntingly cheerful golden glow over the Maui ocean, but I hadn't slept a wink. I had lain there all night, motionless, watching the slow rise and fall of Gregory's chest beside me. The face of the man I thought I knew, so peaceful in sleep, was now a stranger's mask. I spent the dark, lonely hours not in sorrow but in meticulous planning. I was an analyst, after all, and this was the most important analysis of my life. At breakfast, the charade continued. Gregory was nervously checking his phone every few seconds, his leg bouncing under the table. Sorry, he finally announced, clearing his throat and avoiding my gaze. I have another work errand today. Same issue as yesterday. They need me to go sign some documents in person at an affiliate office. The lie was getting more elaborate, more desperate. I looked at him, my expression a blank canvas. What kind of errand, Gregory? Well, it's complicated. A legal thing. A problem I couldn't resolve over the phone yesterday, he said evasively. I need to go out for a bit. I'll be back by the afternoon, I promise. I glanced at my parents and Heather. They said nothing. They just continued eating their pancakes, drizzling them with coconut syrup, as if this was the most normal thing in the world, as if they had been expecting it. Gregory, I said, my voice low and steady, a clear warning he failed to heed. If you are lying to me, tell me honestly right now. He frowned, a flash of irritation in his eyes. He was a bad liar, and he was getting angry that I was questioning his bad lies. What are you talking about? I'm just going to deal with a work thing. Can you please drop it? My father cleared his throat loudly, a classic diversionary tactic. Audrey, that's enough. Trust your husband. This suspicion of yours isn't healthy. That's right, my mother agreed, her tone sharp and critical. You always expect the worst in people. That's why you can't be happy. I closed my mouth, but my resolve hardened into a diamond-sharp point. I nodded silently and finished my breakfast. After Gregory kissed me goodbye, a quick, dry peck on the cheek that felt like a brush of cold air, and left, I waited exactly 10 minutes. Then I stood up. I'm going to do some shopping at the Whalers' Village, I announced to my parents. They looked visibly relieved. Oh, that's a lovely idea. Have fun, dear, my father said. Heather forced an unnatural smile. Hope you find some nice souvenirs. I went back to my room, but I didn't grab my shopping tote. Instead, I put on a large pair of designer sunglasses and a wide-brimmed sun hat I'd bought at the hotel gift shop. A disguise. It felt absurd, like something out of a movie, but I was determined not to be seen. By the time I left the hotel lobby, moving quickly, I could still see Gregory's figure in the distance. He was walking quickly down the beach road, heading toward a taxi stand. I ducked behind a large, ornate potted palm, my heart hammering against my ribs, and waited for him to get into a cab. As his taxi pulled away, I stepped out from my hiding spot and quickly flagged down the next one in line. I slid into the back seat, the vinyl sticking to my skin. My voice was clipped and urgent. See that taxi up ahead? The yellow one. Please follow that car. The driver, an older Hawaiian man with a beautifully weathered face and kind, knowing eyes, raised a single eyebrow as he looked at me in the rearview mirror. Playing detective, ma'am? Is that a problem? I responded coldly, my patience worn thin. Not at all. He shrugged, his demeanor easy and calm as he expertly pulled out into traffic. Not uncommon in Hawaii. It's a romantic place. All sorts of drama happens. You just tell me where to go. We followed Gregory's taxi for about 20 minutes, heading north, away from the glittering, manicured resorts and into a quieter, more local part of the island. The scenery changed from pristine golf courses to a charming jumble of small houses and lush, untamed greenery. Finally, Gregory's taxi pulled over in front of a small, quaint white church. It was perched on a small hill overlooking the sparkling ocean. A simple, hand-carved wooden sign read, "McKenna Chapel." "Please wait here," I told the driver, handing him a wad of cash that was more than enough for the fare and his time. "I won't be long." I got out of the car, my legs feeling unsteady, like they were made of jelly. I hid behind a thicket of flowering hibiscus bushes across the street and watched as Gregory, my husband, adjusted his shirt, ran a hand through his hair, and walked up the steps and disappeared inside the chapel. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the moment of truth. When he was gone, I took a deep, shuddering breath and crossed the street. The air was thick with the sweet, almost sickening scent of plumeria, a fragrance I knew in that moment I would hate for the rest of my life. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the frantic pulse in my ears, a drumbeat of dread and discovery. I crept along the side of the pristine white church, my movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. I peered through the stained glass windows. The colored glass distorted the view, but I could make out shapes inside, a small gathering of people. My hands were shaking, so I clasped them together to steady them. I found a small side door, slightly ajar, probably left open to catch the ocean breeze. Taking one last ragged breath to steady myself, I quietly slipped inside, pressing my body into the cool, dark shadows of the entryway. And the sight that met my eyes stopped my breath, stopped my heart, and shattered my entire world into a million irreparable pieces. There, standing before the altar, bathed in the soft, multicolored light filtering through the window, behind them, was Heather, my sister. She was dressed in a beautiful, simple white wedding gown that clung to her perfect figure. Her hair was woven with small white flowers, and standing next to her in a crisp black tuxedo was Gregory, my husband. They were holding hands, smiling into each other's eyes as a man who appeared to be a minister read from a book. And sitting in the front pew, beaming with an almost beatific pride, were my parents. My mother, Joyce, was actually dabbing a tear of joy from the corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief. My father, Walter, looked on with a contented smile, as if this was the happiest day of his life. I shrank back against the cold stone wall, hidden in the dim light of the narthex. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I had to put a hand against the wall to steady myself. I leaned forward just enough to hear their voices, carried on the quiet, sacred air of the chapel. She doesn't know, right? It was Heather's voice, anxious and high-pitched, a childish whisper that grated on my nerves. "Don't worry, relax," Gregory answered, squeezing her hand. His voice was a low, soothing murmur that I knew so well, a voice that had told me he loved me 1,000 times, a voice that had promised to cherish me in sickness and in health. She doesn't suspect a thing. She's so oblivious, wrapped up in her work she'll never notice. My mother laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound that desecrated the holy space. Audrey's head is always full of work and numbers. She can't even begin to imagine our clever little plan. "What happens after the wedding?" my father, Walter, asked, his voice practical. Gregory's voice turned cold, calculating. The voice of an analyst, not a lover, a tone I had never heard before. "First, I'll ask for a divorce. I'll play the victim. Say we've grown apart, that her career always came first. Her pride is so high she'll give in without a public fight just to make it go away quietly. Our prenup is weak," Lorraine warned her about it. "We'll get at least half of Audrey's liquid assets. Her portfolio is worth millions. Then we'll move to New York," Heather added, her voice giddy with excitement. "I've always wanted to live in Manhattan." "And we won't have to worry about our old age," my mother said happily. "Audrey won't abandon us even after a divorce. She's too dutiful. She'll feel guilty and keep paying the mortgage on our house. We'll be secure. When your remarriage to Heather becomes public, it will damage Audrey's reputation at her company," my father added, a cruel satisfaction in his voice. "A scandal like that, being cheated on with her own sister. She'll be humiliated. She won't be able to resist our demands." My body was trembling uncontrollably, a violent, silent earthquake. But my eyes were cold and clear. The analyst inside me, the part that thrives in crisis, took over. I slowly, carefully raised my smartphone from my purse. My movements were fluid, silent. I hit record on the voice memo app. Then I switched to the camera and, through a small gap between a statue and a pillar, I began to film. I zoomed in on their smiling, treacherous faces as they exchanged vows they had no right to make. "What do you think Audrey is doing right now?" Heather asked, with a malicious little giggle. Gregory shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "Probably sitting idly by the hotel pool worrying about my work emergency. She thinks she's so smart, but she's actually easy to fool. That's why I married her, for her salary and her eventual inheritance from her grandparents. She was an investment, and now it's time for that investment to pay out." Cold, pure rage, unlike anything I had ever felt, spread through my heart, icing over the white-hot pain. But no emotion showed on my face. My mind was already working, calculating, planning my next move. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They were about to learn. I stayed for 5 more minutes, my phone held as steady as a surgeon's hand. I captured every vow, every lie. I filmed them exchanging the simple gold bands they'd probably bought with my money. I filmed them sharing a kiss at the altar, a grotesque parody of a sacred moment. I filmed my parents, Walter and Joyce, applauding with tears in their eyes. Once I was certain I had gathered more than enough evidence, undeniable, irrefutable, legally damning proof of their conspiracy, I quietly slipped back out the side door. The sweet, cloying scent of the plumeria hit me again, and I felt a wave of nausea. I walked down the stone steps, my steps even and measured, and crossed the street. The taxi driver saw me coming and started the engine. I got into the back seat and closed the door with a soft click. "Please take me back to the hotel," I said. My voice was calm, eerily calm. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the driver asked, his kind eyes looking at me in the rearview mirror with genuine concern. "You look pale, like you've seen a ghost." "Yes," I replied, my voice devoid of any tremor, any hint of the cataclysm that had just occurred. "I'm fine." I looked out the window at the passing palm trees, at the brilliant blue sky that seemed to mock the darkness that had just consumed my life. "I just need to make some significant changes to my life plans." He nodded, sensing he shouldn't ask any more questions. We drove the rest of the way in silence. In my mind, the hurt was already crystallizing, transforming. The soft, wounded part of me, the loving wife and dutiful daughter, had died in that church. And in her place, something else was being born, something hard and sharp and powerful. They thought I was a fool. They thought I was a piggy bank. They thought I would crumble and cry. They had underestimated me. They had no idea that the same mind that could predict the rise and fall of global stock markets could also orchestrate a downfall of a very different, very personal kind. They had just made the worst investment of their lives, and I was about to make them pay in full. If you've listened this far, it would mean the world to me if you could like this video and just comment the number 1 down below. It lets me know you're still here on this journey with me. Your support is a huge encouragement for me, so please comment with a 1 so I can see you. And now, let me tell you what happened next. Back at the hotel, I walked through the opulent lobby, my posture perfect, my expression serene. I nodded politely at the concierge who greeted me by name. I rode the glass elevator up to our floor, my reflection a pale, determined ghost. I entered our suite and locked the door behind me with a decisive click. For a moment, I just stood there in the entryway, the silence of the room pressing in on me. I looked at the king-sized bed with its pristine white sheets, the bed I had shared with that monster. I saw his clothes spilling out of his open suitcase on the luggage rack, a gaudy Hawaiian shirt he'd bought yesterday, and I felt nothing. The pain was a distant, buzzing hum, overridden by a cold, clear sense of purpose. The time for tears and heartbreak would come later. Right now, it was time for action. I walked over to the desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my movements efficient and precise. There was no hesitation. I knew exactly what needed to be done. The first email was to my lawyer, Lorraine Vance. We had been friends since college, and she was the sharpest, most ruthless divorce attorney in Boston. She hated bullies and cheats. She was perfect. Subject: urgent legal action required. Williams versus Williams. Lorraine: I need urgent legal advice and immediate action. I have irrefutable video and audio evidence of my husband, Gregory Williams, attempting to commit bigamy with my sister, Heather Montgomery. I also have evidence of a conspiracy between Gregory, Heather, and my parents, Walter and Joyce Montgomery, to defraud me of my assets upon a planned divorce. Please review the attached encrypted files immediately. Prepare divorce proceedings on the most favorable terms possible. I want to leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back. Also, please advise me on the swiftest legal method to seize all financial support to my parents. I will call you from a secure line tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to discuss strategy. Regards, Audrey. I created an encrypted folder, uploaded the damning files from my phone, and attached it. Click. Sent. The next email was to my private banker, a quiet, meticulous man named Tom Sterling, who had managed my portfolio for nearly a decade. Subject: urgent and confidential. Secure all assets immediately. Tom. Effective. Immediately, I need you to execute the following. 1. Move all assets, stocks, bonds, and liquid cash currently held in my name or in any joint accounts into new, separate, individual accounts accessible only by me. 2. Freeze all joint credit cards and lines of credit. 3. Prepare all necessary documentation to initiate the immediate sale of our primary residence. I have reason to believe my husband is a significant financial risk. I will be in your office on Monday to sign all necessary paperwork. Discretion is paramount. Audrey Williams. Click. Sent. Finally, I emailed the head of HR at my firm. Early return from vacation. Lisa. Due to a severe personal family emergency, I must return from my vacation earlier than planned. I have booked the red-eye flight back to Boston tonight. I will be back in the office, resuming my normal duties this coming Monday. Thank you for your understanding. Audrey. Click. Sent. After the emails were dispatched, I opened my suitcase and began packing. I moved with a mechanical, detached efficiency. I folded only my own clothes, took only my own toiletries, my books, my laptop. I touched none of his things. I saw a framed photo of us on the nightstand, taken on our first anniversary. We were smiling, happy. I picked it up, looked at the face of the man I had loved, and felt a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, for the woman I used to be. I placed the photo face down on the table. As I packed, I smiled quietly, a humorless stretching of my lips. They didn't know the real me. They only knew the version of me I allowed them to see, the dutiful daughter, the loving, generous wife. They had no concept of the calm, calculating analyst who could liquidate a failing, toxic asset without a moment's hesitation. And that's exactly what they had all become, a toxic asset. You chose the wrong person to cross, I whispered to the empty, silent room, turning my back on the beautiful Maui ocean visible from the window. I left a short note at the front desk to my family. Had to leave early for an urgent business emergency. Enjoy the rest of your vacation, that was it. Just that cold, simple, plausible message. Let them have their honeymoon. The real world would be waiting for them when they got back. The red-eye flight back to Boston was a strange, surreal bubble of time. While other passengers slept or watched movies, I sat with a legal pad and a pen, my laptop open on the tray table. I didn't rest. I stared out the window at the endless, inky black sea of clouds and hardened my heart, meticulously formulating every step of my multi-pronged attack. This wasn't just an emotional retaliation. This was a strategic takedown, and I would leave no stone unturned. Upon arriving at my house, I didn't even pause to sleep. I showered, changed into one of my most formidable business suits, and headed straight to Lorraine Vance's office downtown. She was waiting for me, a file open on her desk and a look of cold fury in her eyes. Audrey, I've seen the files, she said, her voice tight with anger on my behalf. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. This is monstrous. This isn't just infidelity. This is a calculated, premeditated conspiracy to commit fraud. We can annihilate him. Good, I said calmly, taking the seat opposite her. That's the plan, Annihilation. What are our first steps? For the next 2 hours, we mapped out the strategy on a large whiteboard in her office. We discussed assets, stocks, property deeds, and legal precedents. Lorraine was brilliant, suggesting avenues I hadn't even considered. Your prenup is weak, just as he said, she confirmed, but his fraudulent behavior and the attempted bigamy render it almost irrelevant. We can argue for a completely inequitable distribution of assets based on his egregious conduct. Next, I executed the instructions I'd given my banker. I spent an hour at the bank, signing document after document. Access to all joint accounts was severed. My assets, my salary, my entire financial world was moved into a series of trusts and new accounts, a fortress that Gregory and my family would never be able to touch. The price for trying to ruin my life would be high. Then came the movers. I met them at the house that afternoon, They were a team of 4 strong, silent men. My instructions were simple. Take the photos, the furniture, the art collection, I told their foreman. Take the rugs, the lamps, the kitchen appliances. Take everything that was purchased in the last 3 years. I have the receipts, which was, of course, almost everything. Leave only the items that Mr. Williams brought into this marriage himself. The foreman, a large man with gentle eyes, looked at me with a flicker of understanding and sympathy. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. For the next 5 hours, I watched as my married life was wrapped in blankets, put in boxes, and loaded onto a truck. The house grew more and more cavernous, the echoes of their footsteps growing louder in the empty rooms. When they were done, almost nothing was left. A cheap, sagging reading lamp by his side of the bed, a worn-out, ugly armchair he brought from his bachelor apartment, a box of his old paperbacks. That was it, his entire contribution to our home. After the movers left, I walked through the hollow, silent rooms. I went to the garage and found a can of red spray paint I'd bought on the way from the airport. On the large, empty wall of the living room, where our ridiculously large wedding portrait used to hang, I wrote just one word in big, angry, dripping letters: "One liars." The hiss of the can and the acrid smell of the paint felt strangely satisfying, a primal scream made visible. Finally, I sat at the now empty kitchen counter and took out a file I had kept locked in a safe deposit box for years. It was my insurance policy, the one I had prayed I would never have to use. My parents, for all their posturing about their reputation, had a closet full of skeletons: my father's affair with a woman from his old office, my mother's habit of mismanaging funds from the local charity she ran, their long history of creative tax evasion. I had the emails, the documents, the proof. I had kept their secrets out of a misguided sense of family loyalty. That loyalty was now dead. Just as they didn't care about my reputation, I said to the empty house, "I won't care about theirs." I compiled everything into a neat, damning file. The next day, I signed the final papers with the real estate agent to put the house on the market for a quick sale. "I want to be free from this place of betrayal as soon as possible," I told her. When all the preparations were complete, I moved my essential belongings into a new, sleek, and fiercely private apartment downtown that I'd already leased. I told no one my new address. I completely erased my traces from my old life. And then I waited. I waited for the day the happy couple and their cheering section would return from paradise. That day, I was at work. I was in the middle of a high-level meeting discussing market projections, my focus absolute. I felt a quiet hum of power, of control, a feeling that had been missing from my personal life for far too long. I had instructed Lorraine to text me the moment they arrived. Around 3 p.m., my phone buzzed silently on the table. I glanced down. "They're here." "The show is about to begin." I took a slow sip of water, a small, cold smile touching my lips, and then refocused on the presentation. When Gregory, Heather, and my parents, all tanned and laughing from their extended Hawaiian vacation, pulled up to the house, the first sign that something was wrong was the "For Sale" sign on the front lawn. Not just any sign, but one with a large sale pending banner slapped across it. Their laughter died. Confused, they used Gregory's key to open the front door. The first thing they saw was the cavernous, empty foyer and the single, furious red word screaming at them from the living room wall: "Liars, liars." Cautiously, as if entering a haunted house, they proceeded into the empty living room. The echo of their footsteps bounced off the bare walls. In the absolute center of the vast, barren floor, a single heavy wooden table remained, an island in a sea of emptiness. On it, divorce papers and a thick stack of financial documents were arranged in a neat, orderly pile. And standing beside the table, dressed in an impeccable, expensive, dark gray suit with a cold, impassive expression, was Lorraine Vance. "What's happening? What is this? Where's Audrey?" Gregory asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and panic. Lorraine calmly explained, her voice clear and precise, cutting through the stunned silence. "Miss Audrey Montgomery knows everything," she said, deliberately using my maiden name, "including the ceremony in Hawaii." She held up a tablet, her movements unhurried. She pressed play. The video I had taken in the chapel filled the screen, the audio of their treacherous vows and conspiratorial whispers echoing unnervingly in the empty house. The color drained from Heather's face. She looked like she was going to be sick. My parents were utterly speechless, their mouths hanging open in disbelief. "Where is she?" Gregory asked frantically, his voice cracking. "I need to talk to her. This is a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Lorraine retorted coldly, pausing the video. "And you no longer have the privilege of speaking with Miss Montgomery. She has instructed me to handle all communication. She will not be returning to your lives. This is your final encounter." She gestured to the pile of documents on the table. "These are the divorce papers. Ms. Montgomery is filing on grounds of adultery and fraud. On the table, you will also find bank statements showing that all joint accounts have been closed and all of Miss Montgomery's personal assets have been secured. This is a legitimate and immediate response to your fraudulent acts." She then turned her cool gaze to my parents. "You will also find documents here formally ceasing all financial support. Miss Montgomery will no longer be paying your mortgage, your medical bills, or supplementing your income. That assistance has now ended permanently." She let that sink in before continuing. "Furthermore, arrangements have been made for certain information regarding your hidden debts and questionable economic activities to become public within your community should you contest any of this." "I have a file here," she said, tapping a thick manila folder on the table, detailing your improprieties with the charity fund and your history of tax evasion. "It is compiled and ready to be delivered to the IRS and the district attorney. However, the disclosure of this information," she paused, letting the threat hang in the air, "may change depending on your full and immediate cooperation." She then turned back to the horrified newlyweds. "As for your marriage, it is of course legally invalid. Bigamy by a married person is not recognized in this state. In fact," she added, her voice dropping slightly, "it is an act that could be subject to criminal penalties, including jail time." The blood completely drained from Gregory's face. He looked like he was about to collapse. "I want to talk to Audrey," my mother finally whimpered, her voice trembling. "She's our daughter. She can't do this to us." "Unfortunately, she no longer thinks of you as her parents," Lorraine replied matter-of-factly. "Let me convey her exact words to you. Blood relation is a coincidence, but betrayal is a choice. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Gregory finally found his voice, sputtering with weak, pathetic anger. "I won't let her get away with this. I have rights. I'll fight this divorce." "On that point, please look at this," Lorraine said, producing one last document from her briefcase. It was an official letter, a notice from the HR department of my company, copied to the head of compliance at his bank. "An official inquiry has been filed with your employer, Mr. Williams, reporting that there are serious questions about your integrity, character, and potential criminal conduct. Your position at the bank, and indeed your entire career in finance, is now in jeopardy," Lorraine informed him calmly. "If you choose to fight this divorce in any way, Ms. Montgomery is prepared to release all of the evidence you saw on this tablet to the media. The choice is yours." As they stood there, utterly broken and defeated, 2 uniformed security guards I had hired appeared silently at the front door. Lorraine gestured to them. "These gentlemen will escort you while you collect any personal belongings you believe are still on the premises. You have 24 hours to vacate the property. The house is under contract, and the new owners will be taking possession next week." Their grand plan, their entire future built on my money and my heart, had crumbled into dust in an instant. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the consequences of their own bottomless greed and betrayal. 2 years passed. The view from my new office was even more spectacular. I was now vice president of a major investment firm in Manhattan, having accepted a lucrative promotion and transfer. The city skyline, a breathtaking panorama of ambition and light, was visible from the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. It was a daily reminder of my new life, a life I had built for myself on my own terms. My name was Audrey Montgomery again, and it felt wonderful. On my polished mahogany desk, there were photos of me laughing with new friends, women who were fiercely loyal and funny. On the wall hung certificates honoring my professional achievements. The pain of the past hadn't vanished overnight. It had left scars. For the first year, I spent time with a wonderful psychological counselor once a week. We talked through the years of emotional manipulation from my family, the profound shock of the betrayal. She helped me understand that their actions were a reflection of their own brokenness, not a measure of my worth. She helped me learn to trust again, starting with trusting myself. True strength, I had written in my journal after one session, is having the courage to stand up for yourself, even if you're standing alone. One afternoon, there was a soft knock on my office door. "Come in," I answered, looking up from a report. A man with a warm, crinkly smile and kind eyes peeked his head in. Just came to confirm our lunch date before the big board meeting. Russell Croft smiled at me. He was a tenured professor of economic history at Columbia University, a brilliant, funny, and deeply gentle man whom I had met at an investment seminar a year ago. We had started with coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into weekends exploring the city. He was now my partner. Of course I haven't forgotten. I returned his smile, the gesture feeling easy and natural. His presence brought a sense of peace and stability to my life that I had never known before. He loved me for my mind, for my sharp wit, for my resilience. He never once asked about my finances. With him, I felt seen, cherished for who I was, not for what I had. That weekend, I hosted a barbecue party in the garden of my new home in a quiet, leafy suburb outside the city. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, filled with light and laughter and good food. Surrounding me were the people I had chosen as my family, my loyal friends, respected colleagues, and Russell, who stood by my side, his hand resting gently and reassuringly on the small of my back. "Let's make a toast," I said, raising my glass of champagne, the bubbles sparkling in the late afternoon sun. To new chapters, to chosen families, and to the courage to choose your own happiness. Everyone cheered, their voices a warm chorus of affection. As I looked around at their smiling faces, I finally understood a profound truth. True family isn't about blood relations or shared last names. It's about the relationships you build. The ones where people respect you, support you, and celebrate your worth unconditionally. Before heading to that life-changing lunch with Russell, I had been cleaning out my desk and had come across a small newspaper clipping from a suburban Chicago paper sent to me by an old college friend who lived there. I didn't keep it out of malice, but as a quiet, somber reminder. It wasn't a big article, just a few paragraphs in the local news section. It detailed the harsh, unforgiving reality my former family now faced. They had moved to a dreary suburb of Chicago to escape their shame and their creditors. Gregory had never recovered professionally. His reputation in the tight-knit banking industry was destroyed. The article mentioned he was last seen working a low-wage job as a shift manager at a big-box store. A photo showed him in a cheap suit, his face tired and defeated. Heather, her once vibrant beauty now faded and clouded by fatigue and regret, was working as a supermarket cashier to make ends meet. What were we thinking then? She had reportedly asked a former friend who had spoken to the paper. It was like a fantasy, and then the fantasy ended. My parents had faced their own harsh reality. Having lost my financial support, they'd had to declare bankruptcy. They sold their home to cover their debts and now lived in a small, government-subsidized apartment for the elderly. Their social reputation had completely collapsed after their secrets were discreetly leaked within their community. Former friends had distanced themselves. They were facing a lonely, bitter old age, a prison of their own making, built brick by brick with their own greed. I hadn't completely forgiven them. I don't know if I ever will. Forgiveness is a complex thing, but the anger, the burning rage that had fueled me, had cooled into a quiet resolve. I had learned from their betrayal. I had become stronger, wiser, and more discerning. I had learned that you can and you must choose to walk through life with people who know your value and respect it. As Russell squeezed my hand under the table at lunch that day, our conversation flowing easily from economic theory to plans for the weekend, I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. Blood ties are a coincidence. Real bonds, the ones that matter, are a choice. My new life began the moment I chose to know my own worth, to demand respect, and to build genuine, honest relationships. From the ashes of a devastating betrayal, I had found not just revenge, but something far more valuable, far more lasting, true happiness, and a peace I never thought possible. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, and it took me a long time to be able to tell it without feeling the sting of the past. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we are all so much stronger than we think. If you've ever been through something similar, or if this story resonated with you in any way, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter, and your strength is an inspiration. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. It truly means the world to me.